Tonight, beneath a sky stretched wide as eternity, we follow the forgotten tale of a lone rider who thundered across the endless steppe, swift as the wind, faithful as the stars. His name was whispered only in camps and courtyards, spoken with awe. The courier who outran an empire, a man whose courage carried messages that shaped the destiny of nations, and whose blade, unbroken, unbeaten, gleamed like a shard of the moon. Before we begin this slow, drifting journey through the grasslands of ancient Mongolia, where hooves echo like distant heartbeats and campfires glow like fallen embers of the sun, I want to welcome everyone listening, whether you're joining from the U.S. in the quiet hours past midnight, from Europe settling into the calm of evening, from Canada wrapped warmly against the cold, or from any other place across the world, no matter the time on your clock. If you enjoy these nighttime histories, please like, subscribe, and share a gentle comment about where you're listening from. It truly helps this story reach others who need rest. Now, take a moment. Adjust your pillows, let your breathing slow, and allow your mind to soften like the steppe beneath a dawn mist. When you're ready, we will ride together into the unfolding night toward a tale woven from wind, courage, and quiet determination. The first light of morning crept over the Mongolian steppe like a soft breath, pale gold spilling across the horizon in slow, delicate strokes. The grasses, millions of slender blades, shivered as though waking from a long sleep, their movement creating a faint, whispering chorus that stretched farther than any eye could see. It was a land without edges, a place where sky met earth in a seamless embrace, and where silence held an ancient kind of power. Upon a small rise, a solitary figure waited beside his horse. The rider sat with a stillness carved from patience and purpose, his silhouette outlined by the warming glow of dawn. His name, Erdene, was spoken lightly in the imperial relay stations, carried between guards with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Some called him the Empire's swiftest courier. Others, those who had seen the flash of steel at his hip, murmured that he was something more, a swordsman undefeated, not because he sought battle, but because his journey demanded survival. Erdene breathed in the cold, sharp air, letting it settle deep into his chest. The wind tasted faintly of dust, of wild herbs crushed under hooves, of distant fires from nomadic hearths. It was the scent of home, though Erdene had not stayed in one place long enough to call anything home in years. His life was the saddle, the road, the ceaseless rhythm of hoofbeats carrying messages that could shift the fate of khans and kingdoms. Beside him, his mare, Kutulun, stamped gently, her warm breath rising in wisps. She was as much a legend as her rider, fast, sure-footed, and loyal in ways that words could only try to capture. Together they had crossed frozen rivers, outrun storms, and moved silently through moonlit plains where wolves' eyes glimmered like scattered stars. This morning, though, felt different. As Erdene tightened the last strap of his saddlebag, he felt a faint tremor of unease ripple through the ground beneath his boots. Not danger, exactly, just the quiet awareness that the wind carried news of change. A message awaited him at the relay station below, sealed with the emblem of a noble whose affairs often stirred the empire like a restless serpent. Erdene placed a hand on Kutulun's neck, steadying both her and himself. The task ahead was unknown, but that was the nature of his calling, to ride into uncertainty with the calm of a man who understood that even the wildest roads yielded to patience. The sun's rim finally broke free of the horizon. Warmth touched the rider's cheek, and the long journey of the day began. The relay station lay tucked in a shallow fold of the steppe, its wooden beams weathered by wind and years, its banners hanging still in the cool morning air. Smoke drifted gently from a single chimney, curling upward before dissolving into the pale sky. As Erdene approached, Cthulhu's hooves made soft, rhythmic thuds against the packed earth, announcing their arrival long before he dismounted. Inside, the warm glow of the hearth softened the edges of the dim room. Shelves lined with scrolls stood like quiet sentinels, each one holding words that could ripple across the empire like stones thrown into a vast lake. The station keeper, an older man with a broad face and eyes that seemed to carry every mile of the steppe, glanced up as Erdene stepped inside. "You're early," the keeper murmured, voice rough as worn leather. "But that's your way, isn't it?" Erdene offered a small nod, the closest thing he ever gave to a smile on the road. I sensed there was urgency. The keeper hesitated before reaching beneath the counter. When he emerged, he held a scroll bound in deep red string, the seal a striking crimson wax pressed with the symbol of coiling wings. It belonged not to a minor noble, but to one of the empire's most powerful and unpredictable lords, an advisor rumored to shape the Khan's decisions with whispers and shadows. The station keeper lowered his voice, as though the walls themselves might overhear. "This message, they say it must reach Karakorum before the next moon rises. Others have refused to carry it. They believe it invites misfortune." Erdene took the scroll carefully, feeling its weight, not in his hands, but in the stirring of the air around him. Important messages always shifted the steppe in subtle ways, tugging threads of fate from invisible places. But this one felt different, heavy, watchful. Still, his duty was simple, to deliver the sealed words no matter what they held. As he slipped the scroll safely into the inner pocket of his coat, a faint gust of wind pressed against the door, rattling its frame. The fire flickered, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the floorboards like spirits in the dim light. The keeper's gaze followed those shadows. "You should ride swiftly. There are rumors of disturbances in the west. Bandit riders, or something stranger. Travel with caution." Erdene bowed slightly in gratitude. But in truth, caution was something he had long since folded into his nature, a quiet companion on every ride. Outside, Cthulhu waited, ears perked, sensing the shift in her rider's mood. Erdene mounted, tightening his grip on the reins as the wind swept across the open plains, colder now, as though touched by the message he carried. He exhaled slowly, letting the breath steady him. Then, with a gentle kick, he and Cthulhu began their journey toward the heart of the empire, toward Karakorum, and whatever truths awaited within the sealed crimson wax. The steppe stretched before them like an endless road of possibilities. The day unfolded gently at first, with pale sunlight washing over the vast sweep of the steppe. The grasses swayed in long, rolling waves, as if the land itself breathed in a slow, ancient rhythm. Erdene let Cthulhu find her pace, swift but steady, the kind of movement that could be kept for hours without tiring either rider or horse. The wind tugged softly at his cloak, carrying with it the scents of wild sage, cool earth, and distant rain. But as noon drifted into afternoon, the sky began to change. First came a subtle dimming, a faint thickening of the light. Then, on the far horizon, clouds gathered in heavy layered bands, deep slate gray with underbellies that pulsed with muted silver. They crept forward like a great silent army, shifting the mood of the steppe from tranquil openness to something watchful and expectant. Cthulhu's ears flicked toward the storm, and Erdine felt her breath tighten beneath him. She was brave, fearless even, but she understood the language of nature better than any human. "We'll be fine," he whispered, leaning close to her neck. His voice, calm and low, blended with the whisper of the grass. The wind picked up, growing cooler, sharper. It hummed across the plains, pulling at loose strands of Erdine's hair and sending them dancing around his face. The clouds overhead deepened, their edges bruised with violet, casting long shadows that slid across the land like drifting spirits. Still, Erdine rode on. The Empire's roads were not marked by stone or sign, only by memory, instinct, and stories told by those who lived their lives beneath open sky. Erdine trusted these guides. He trusted Cthulhu. And yet something gnawed at him, a faint unease that settled low in his chest. Not fear, recognition. The steppe was speaking, warning, urging, trying to guide him. And Erdine had learned long ago never to ignore such whispers. A sudden sound pierced the wind. Hoofbeats, fast, purposeful, approaching from behind. Erdine didn't slow. His hand slipped instinctively toward the hilt of his sword, the leather grip worn smooth from years of quiet readiness. Cthulhu tensed beneath him, her muscles coiling like those of a wolf preparing to leap. The hoofbeats grew louder. For a moment, Erdine wondered if the station keeper's warnings had come too late, if the bandits roaming the western passes had already picked up his trail. But then, from the corner of his eye, he spotted a flicker of color weaving through the tall grass, blue cloth embroidered with the symbol of a falcon. Not bandits, Imperial scouts. A single rider broke into view, breath misting the air as his horse surged forward. He slowed only when he drew close enough to meet Erdine's gaze. "Courier!" the scout called out, voice strained with urgency. "A message from the capital. The roads ahead are no longer safe." Erdine's grip tightened on the reins. "What has happened?" The scout swallowed, eyes flicking toward the storm building overhead. "The Empire moves tonight, and you," he said quietly, "ride directly into its shadow." The wind howled softly, stirring the grasses around them like 1,000 whispering voices. The storm, the message, the sudden warning, all of it shifted into place like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was assembling. Erdine breathed in the thickening air, steadying himself. The road forward had just become far more dangerous. The scout's horse shivered beneath him, its breath rising in pale clouds as the wind pushed harder across the plains. Somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered like an unsettled giant turning in its sleep. Erdine sat tall in the saddle, calm but alert, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the scout. "Speak clearly," Erdine said, his voice steady, despite the storm building around them. "What shadow do you mean?" The scout swallowed, gripping his reins tightly. His cloak fluttered violently in a sudden gust, snapping like a banner in battle. "The western tribes have broken their treaty," he said. "A faction loyal to a rival noble seeks to intercept imperial messages. They know couriers ride with orders that could change the balance of power." Erdine's pulse slowed, becoming deliberate and controlled. The crimson-sealed scroll in his coat suddenly felt heavier, as though the words inside were aware of the turmoil unfolding across the steppe. "And they know I am riding?" he asked. The scout nodded once. "They have eyes everywhere. Smoke signals, hidden watchers in the grasslands, hunters following hoofprints. You must not take the main route." The scout leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the wind itself might betray him. "There are riders behind you already, skilled, relentless, They will not stop. Cthulhu tossed her head, nostrils flaring. She sensed it, the tension, the danger, the shift in Erdane's breathing. The steppe had always been her home, her companion, and her teacher. Tonight, it hummed with warning. Erdane looked to the horizon, where the storm clouds churned like dark waters. Lightning flashed intermittently, illuminating distant ridges in ghostly silver. The air tasted of iron and approaching rain. "What path remains?" he asked quietly. The scout pointed toward the northwest, where the land dipped into a labyrinth of ravines and rolling hills, beautiful in daylight, treacherous in a storm. "The hidden gullies," the scout said. "Few outsiders know them. The tribes avoid them after dusk. But you—" He paused as though measuring Erdane's resolve. "You might pass unseen." Might, not would. Erdane accepted the uncertainty with the same calm he accepted everything. Then he inclined his head in thanks. "You have done well. Return to your post." The scout hesitated. "Courier? If they catch you, they will not ask questions." A faint smile touched Erdane's lips, quiet, controlled, almost tender. "Then they must ride faster than the steppe wind." With that, the scout turned his mount and vanished across the plains, his figure swallowed quickly by the sweeping grass and low rumble of thunder. Erdane took a slow breath, letting it settle through him like a stone sinking into still water. He touched Cthulhu's neck, feeling the warmth beneath her coat, the sure beat of her pulse. "We ride for the gullies," he whispered. The mare tensed, then surged forward with powerful, fluid strides, her hooves carving arcs through the tall grass as the storm darkened the sky above them. Behind, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of distant riders, hunters, pursuers, drawn by the scent of a message too valuable to let pass into the night. The wind roared, carrying the first cold drops of rain. The chase had begun. The first touch of rain brushed Erdane's cheek like a cool fingertip, gentle yet foretelling the weight of the storm to come. Cthulhu's hooves beat a steady rhythm across the darkening plains, her mane whipping back as the wind surged around them. The grasses parted sharply beneath her stride, bending in waves that blurred into one another as rider and horse flew across the steppe. Behind them, the echo of pursuing hooves rose and fell, sometimes fading into the murmur of wind, sometimes growing louder, reminding Erdane that distance alone would not save him. The riders who followed him were skilled trackers. They would not tire. They would not turn back. Ahead, the land began to shift. What had once been broad, rolling plains narrowed into uneven folds, dips, and sudden ridges carved long ago by ancient waters. The entrance to the hidden gullies appeared almost without warning, a seam in the earth where the grasses thinned and the soil dipped downward into a jagged, winding channel. Cthulhu slowed just enough to test the ground beneath her hooves. Her ears twitched, listening to the distant thunder, the rush of wind through stone corridors, and the faint tremor of danger that pulsed through the landscape. Erdane leaned low in his saddle, guiding her gently into the shadowed passage. The air cooled immediately. Stone walls rose on either side, rough and streaked with dark mineral veins. Small patches of hardy moss clung to the rock, glowing faintly green in the dim light. The wind funneled through the narrow space with a low, eerie hum, as though the earth itself whispered ancient warnings. Erdane's breath steadied. This place demanded silence and awareness. Here, sound carried unpredictably, echoes twisted and stretched, making distant noises seem close and close noises seem far away. Only someone who trusted instinct over hearing could navigate safely. Cthulhun stepped with precise, deliberate movements, picking her path among loose stones and narrow ledges. Erdene let her choose the way. She knew the language of the land better than any map. Above them, the sky darkened further, and rain began to fall in thin, cold streams that slipped between the rocks. The drops struck the stone like scattered beads, forming tiny rivulets that raced down the walls. Then, faintly, from beyond the gully's mouth, came the unmistakable sound of riders arriving. Their hooves struck the ground in harsh, irregular beats, impatient, probing, searching. Erdene pressed a calming hand along Cthulhun's neck and guided her deeper into the twisting passage. The path narrowed, then widened, then split like branching threads. Shadows gathered in each turn, thickening as the storm pushed clouds across the sky. He listened, the rain, the hum of the wind, Cthulhun's steady breath, and beneath it all, the faint scrape of rocks as the pursuers dismounted, choosing to enter the gullies on foot. They were close, closer than he had hoped. But the gullies, for all their danger, also held secrets, hidden paths known to few, old routes carved by generations of travelers who valued silence over speed. Erdene exhaled steady and slow. "The shadow grows," he murmured to himself, "but so does the path." He nudged Cthulhun forward once more, deeper into the labyrinth of stone, listening as the storm thundered overhead like a distant drum. The chase had entered sacred ground. The hidden gullies wound deeper into the earth, narrowing until only a sliver of the storm-darkened sky could be seen overhead. Rain fell in thin sheets, slipping down the stone walls and pooling in quiet, reflective basins that mirrored fragments of cloud and flickers of lightning. The air smelled of wet rock and cold minerals, an old scent untouched by the world above. Cthulhun moved with the cautious grace of a creature born to sense what others could not. Each step was measured. Each breath was attuned to the shifting vibrations beneath her hooves. Erdene leaned into her movement, listening with his entire body rather than his ears. For the gullies were alive with echoes. Footsteps far away bounced off stone and returned as whispers. Raindrops striking uneven surfaces created rhythms that mimicked the soft tread of unseen walkers. Even the wind seemed to carry voices from impossible distances. In this place, sound was a trickster. Erdene closed his eyes for a moment, letting the pattern settle into something recognizable. He breathed slowly, letting his heartbeat sync with Cthulhun's, a steady, grounding pulse. Together, they could read the labyrinth. A faint clatter broke through the hum of rain, stones shifting behind them, then another, and then a soft exhale, too controlled to be natural. The pursuers had entered the gullies. Erdene urged Cthulhun forward, guiding her toward a branching path on the left, where the walls widened just enough for a horse to pass. The passage curved sharply, plunging them into deeper shadow. The air cooled further. The light dimmed. For a moment, it felt as though they had stepped beneath the surface of a quiet sea. Cthulhun halted suddenly, her ears pinned back. Her body stiffened, not with fear, but with alert purpose. Erdene followed her gaze upward. There, etched near the top of the stone wall, lay markings, faded but unmistakable. Curving lines, intersecting shapes, symbols carved generations ago by travelers who used the gullies as secret roads between clans. Old knowledge, hidden knowledge. A slow smile touched Erdene's lips. "Good," he whispered. "We are still on the true path." The symbols indicated a concealed route ahead, a narrow passage barely visible in the low light. Moss draped over the carved entrance, and shadows masked its depth. Anyone unfamiliar with the gullies would pass it without a second glance. Erdine guided Cthulhun toward it, brushing aside strands of moss with his fingertips. But before they could slip inside, a sound cracked through the air, a sharp metallic ring, a blade being drawn, and then, from the main passage behind them, a voice called out, quiet but steady. "Courier, we know you're here." Cthulhun stamped softly, muscles tightening. Erdine did not turn. Instead, he let the moment stretch, the rain filling the silence between him and the unseen men. Another voice, closer now, spoke with a hint of amusement. "You cannot outrun shadows in a place like this." Erdine breathed in the cool, mineral-rich air. He knew these men wanted the message. He knew they believed he was cornered, but they did not know the gullies, and they did not know him. With a gentle nudge, he and Cthulhun slipped silently into the hidden passage, swallowed by darkness just as footsteps rounded the corner. The pursuers did not see them pass. Only the echoes remained. The hidden passage narrowed so sharply that Erdine had to lower his head to avoid the jagged stone above. Cthulhun moved with careful precision, her hooves choosing quiet patches of earth where sound dissolved rather than echoed. Behind them, the distant voices of the pursuers faded, swallowed by the twisting corridors of the gullies. Gradually the tunnel began to broaden. The air grew cooler still, touched with a faint moisture that hinted at something deeper, more ancient. And then the walls opened outward. They emerged into a vast, silent chamber carved by centuries of wind and water. Smooth stone curved in sweeping arcs, enclosing a pool so still it reflected the dim light like dark glass. The surface had not yet been disturbed by the storm above. It held its own world, quiet, deep, unbroken. Cthulhun paused at the water's edge, lowering her head to drink. The soft ripples drifted outward, touching the far walls before settling once more into perfect stillness. Erdine dismounted slowly, letting his boots sink into the cool sand that ringed the pool. The chamber breathed calmness. Here, no echoes tricked the ear. No wind howled warnings. Silence reigned like a benevolent spirit. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, deeply, fully, something he had not been able to do since receiving the crimson-sealed message. His hand drifted to the inner pocket of his coat, feeling the shape of the scroll. The wax was unbroken, the message intact. And yet he felt it, an undercurrent of danger that pulsed through it like a heartbeat. He crouched by the pool and dipped his fingers into the water. It was cold enough to sting, but pure, drawn from deep beneath the earth. The reflection that stared back at him showed more than the man he was. Dark hair damp with rain, eyes watchful yet calm, expression composed even under threat. But beneath that surface calm, something else stirred memory. The first time he had entered these gullies, he had been a boy, fleeing a raid that consumed his family's camp. An elder warrior had guided him through these same hidden paths, teaching him how to listen, not with ears, but with bones, breath, and instinct. "You survive," the warrior had said, "not by running faster, but by becoming part of the land itself." Erdine let that memory settle into him like a warm pulse. A distant rumble of thunder vibrated through the stone ceiling. The storm was closing in, and with it the pursuers. He rose and placed a steady hand on Cthulhun's neck. She lifted her head, drops of water falling from her muzzle like tiny jewels. "We cannot linger," he whispered. "They will find their way eventually." As he prepared to lead her toward the far side of the chamber, where another narrow passage awaited, something caught his eye. faint markings carved into the stone above the waterline. They were old, older even than the symbols at the entrance, spirals, intersecting lines, and patterns that resembled the flight of birds or the weaving of wind. These were not the markings of travelers. They were warnings. A subtle chill traced the line of Erdine's spine. Whatever lay ahead was not merely a route, it was a threshold, a boundary between the known gullies and the deeper labyrinth seldom spoken of, even among seasoned riders. Cthulhu nudged him gently, sensing his hesitation. Erdine exhaled long and slow. "We go forward," he murmured, "but with respect." He placed his foot in the stirrup and mounted once more. The chamber's stillness shifted as they crossed its edge, ripples spreading outward behind them. The chamber grew distant. The darkness ahead deepened, and the air, once calm, began to hum with something waiting. The narrow passage beyond the chamber pressed inward like the throat of some ancient creature, carved by centuries of water that had long since vanished. The walls here were smoother, almost polished, and the air carried a low, constant vibration, so faint that it felt more sensed than heard. Cthulhu's ears flicked nervously, her steps sure but slow, as though she felt the stone watching. Erdine adjusted his posture, leaning slightly forward, keeping one hand on the reins, and the other lightly touching the wall as they passed. The stone was cool beneath his fingertips, but alive with faint tremors, subtle pulses that mirrored the shifting of the earth, or perhaps something deeper still, the path of murmuring stone. He had heard of it only in stories told by elderly nomads around the fire, a place the steppe itself guarded, a place where those who walked were not merely travelers, but guests on sacred ground. The whispering began softly. At first it was only the sound of wind threading through narrow fissures. Then the vibrations in the stone deepened, blending with echoes carried from unseen tunnels. Words could not be made from the murmurings, yet they were not random. They swelled and receded like the breathing of the earth. Cthulhu halted, hooves planted firmly. Her muscles tightened beneath Erdine's legs, but she did not panic. She listened. Erdine dismounted quietly, letting his boots settle on the soft gravel. He placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "It's only the stone," he whispered, "nothing more." But he knew the truth. In the gullies, the line between natural and supernatural blurred like mist over water. He stepped forward, reaching out to brush his fingertips against the wall again. The murmur shifted, responding to his touch. A deeper pulse pushed through the stone, like the echo of a giant's heartbeat or the distant drum of hooves beneath the surface. For a moment he saw something. A flash of movement in the corner of his eye, then another. Shapes, faint as shadows, dancing across the walls before vanishing without trace. Memories. Echoes of those who had walked this path before him. Or perhaps only tricks of light and imagination. A sudden gust of wind funneled through the passage, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke. Erdine stiffened. Not campfire smoke, sharp, acrid, foreign. The pursuers were close. He swung back into the saddle, guiding Cthulhu deeper into the twisting corridor. The murmuring grew louder now, filling the narrow space with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through their bones. The passage opened without warning onto a broad ledge overlooking a vast chasm. The air rushed upward in cold bursts, carrying mist and the distant roar of an underground river far below. Across the gap, another narrow trail wound upward into the rock, a path barely wide enough for a horse. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, came the clatter of loose stones. Erdine turned his head sharply. Shadows flickered at the far end of the passage. The pursuers had found the chamber. They were moving faster now, driven by confidence or desperation, or orders that did not allow failure. Cthulhun pawed the ground anxiously, sensing the danger. Erdane's gaze swept the ledge, the chasm, and the thin trail ahead. The path was perilous, but it was the only way forward. The murmurs of the stone rose again, louder now, almost urging. "Trust the land," he whispered, gathering the reins. Then, with a deep breath, he guided Cthulhun toward the narrow path that clung to the chasm's edge. Behind them, footsteps quickened. The chase was no longer distant. It was here. The trail ahead narrowed to a ribbon of stone no wider than Cthulhun's stride. One misplaced hoof, one startled misstep, and both rider and horse would tumble into the chasm below, where the roar of unseen waters swallowed even echoes whole. But Cthulhun's muscles moved like braided steel beneath Erdene, steady, sure, unshaken by the yawning drop to her left. The wind swept upward in cool, restless currents, brushing against Erdene's face and tugging at the loose ends of his cloak. Lightning flickered somewhere far above, illuminating the cliffs in momentary silver. When the light faded, shadows reclaimed the rock, deepening its ancient lines. They ascended slowly, following the curving trail that wound along the cliffside. The stone here was different, smooth and strangely resonant, as though hollow chambers lay hidden behind it. Every sound they made, even the soft clink of Erdene's stirrups, seemed to linger in the air a moment too long. These were the listening cliffs, the place where, according to old tales, the spirits of the steppe listened to the paths of those who passed, judging their intent. Erdene felt the weight of those unseen watchers. He let his breath slow, matching the rhythm of Cthulhun's careful steps. A sharp sound broke the quiet, stones scattering. Erdene twisted in the saddle. At the far end of the ledge, silhouettes appeared, dark figures emerging from the narrow passage they had just escaped. The pursuers moved cautiously, but not fearfully. 3 riders, all armed. Their movements efficient, silent, coordinated. These were not ordinary bandits. These were trained men, sent by someone with power and purpose. One raised his hand, signaling the others to pause. Then his voice rang out, carried clear by the echoing cliffs. "Courier, you cannot go farther. The cliffs end ahead. There is no escape." His words struck the stone and returned in softened fragments, repeating themselves like fading whispers. No escape, escape, cape. Cthulhun's ears twitched at the distortion, but Erdene remained steady. He had heard the stories. The cliffs never repeated truth, only fear. He guided her onward. The trail ahead did not end. It curved upward into a narrow arch of stone, hidden from afar, revealed only to those who trusted the land, instead of the warnings shouted across it. The lead pursuer stepped closer, calling again, "You carry what does not belong to you. Surrender the message. You need not die on this mountain." Erdene did not answer. His hand drifted, not to his sword, but to the scroll inside his coat. The wax seal pressed against his chest like a small heated brand. He felt its urgency, its warning. Cthulhun snorted once, impatient to move. The moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Thunder cracked above them, a sound so sharp it shook dust loose from the cliffs. The wind surged in its wake, sweeping along the ledge and forcing the pursuers to shield their faces. Erdene took the opportunity. "Now," he whispered. He pressed his heels gently against Cthulhun's sides, and she moved quickly but carefully toward the stone arch. Her hooves struck the trail with precise certainty, each step chosen, balanced, trusted. The first pursuer lunged forward, shouting something lost in the wind. A rock tumbled from the cliff's edge, then another. The storm had loosened the earth, and the cliffside trembled under its weight. The men behind them hesitated, gauging whether the narrow path could support their climb. Erdina didn't look back. He and Cthulhun slipped beneath the arch just as lightning split the sky again, bathing the entire cliff face in stark, ghost-pale light. The arch swallowed them into shadow. The path beyond descended sharply, winding away from the cliffs and into a valley hidden from the world above. The listening cliffs grew distant behind them, but the voices of the pursuers still echoed faintly. Growing frustrated, growing angry, growing closer. Erdine tightened his grip on the reins. The chase was far from over. The stone arch narrowed behind them, sealing the listening cliffs from view. For a moment, Erdene and Cthulhun descended in near darkness, guided only by instinct and the muted glimmer of reflected lightning. The air grew warmer as they went lower, the storm's chill replaced by a strange stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Then the passage opened. Before them stretched a hidden valley untouched by the storm's fury, a vast basin of grass and wind, encircled by towering cliffs whose peaks vanished into the swirling clouds. The valley floor shimmered with faint green light cast by patches of moss and clusters of pale flowers that glowed softly whenever the breeze touched them. This was the Valley of Gathering Winds, a place whispered about in stories, a place where travelers said the winds learned to speak. Cthulhun stepped forward cautiously, her hooves sinking into soft earth, still warm from the day's last sunlight. The grasses here moved differently, bending not only to the wind, but as though responding to footsteps, bowing faintly as Erdene passed. He inhaled deeply. The scent was unlike any he had known on the steppe. Cool, herbal, tinged with a sweetness that reminded him of summer nights from his childhood. Memories drifted back, his mother humming as she gathered wild roots, his father teaching him how to read the wind by the movement of clouds, the quiet crackling of the fire in their family gyre. A life long gone, yet alive in fragments, carried by the valley's breath. The winds shifted. At first only a gentle swirl, then a sudden spiraling dance that lifted the grasses into rippling patterns. The movement was purposeful, like fingers tracing symbols into the air. Erdene guided Cthulhun onward, letting the wind move around them, examining them, almost greeting them. He had been here once before, many years ago, guided by an elder warrior who believed the valley revealed truth to those who listened. But tonight the winds carried urgency. The storm above rumbled, its presence distant but insistent. The pursuers would not be far behind. Erdene moved toward the valley's center, where a cluster of stone pillars stood, smooth, tall shapes arranged in a circular pattern. Moss draped their surfaces like old cloaks. Each pillar bore carvings worn by time, but their meaning remained unmistakable. Messages left by generations of riders who had passed through this hidden place. He approached one of the stones. The carving showed a horse and rider descending from mountains into a valley of curved lines, winds spiraling around them. Beneath it, faint but legible, were words etched in old Mongol script. Those who carry truth must trust the wind. Erdene felt the weight of the message in his chest. Truth. The sealed scroll pressed against his heart. The heavy silence of the gullies. The relentless chase. The warnings carved into stone. The valley winds rose suddenly. A strong gust swept around the pillars, spiraling upward into a vortex that shimmered faintly with dust and light. Cthulhun stamped her hooves, not in fear but in readiness, as though she understood the valley was awakening. Erdena placed his palm against the nearest pillar. The stone thrummed beneath his touch. Then, quiet footsteps, barely audible over the wind. He turned sharply. Across the valley, at the far edge near the cliff mouth, shapes emerged. Dark silhouettes stepping into the grass. The pursuers had entered the valley, weapons drawn, cautious but confident. The valley winds shifted again, rippling in warning. Cthulhun tensed. Erdene exhaled slowly, accepting the truth the valley revealed. There would be no simple escape, no easy path forward. The rider of the endless steppe would have to choose his ground and hold it. He mounted, the valley air thick with expectation. The storm thundered far above. But here, in the cradle of the valley, only the wind spoke, and it whispered, "Stand." The valley seemed to hold its breath as Erdene mounted Cthulhun once more. The air around them shifted from gentle currents to a focused, circling wind that wrapped the grass in spiraling patterns. The stone pillars hummed faintly, resonating with the movement like ancient drums stirring after a long silence. Across the valley floor, the pursuers spread out. 3 men, their stances low and deliberate, trained in the art of riding and killing in equal measure. Their cloaks snapped behind them, and their blades caught the faint glow of the valley's strange light. They moved with the confidence of hunters who believed their prey had finally reached the end of the road. One stepped forward, lowering the tip of his sword. "Courier," he called, voice steady. "The message, now." His words seemed to dissolve in the wind, scattered like dried leaves. Erdene didn't answer. His hand slid to the hilt of his sword, an unadorned blade, but honed to balance and precision. He had carried it for years, rarely drawn except in dire need. Tonight, the valley itself seemed to urge him toward it. Cthulhun pawed the earth, lifting her head with a sharp, defiant snort. She could sense the danger in the way only a loyal war mare could, reading Erdene's breath, the tension in the men before them, the storm shaking the world above. The pursuers tightened their formation. "You cannot run any more," the lead man said. "Give us the scroll, and perhaps we will show mercy." A quiet fell between them, a deep, listening silence. Erdene slowly exhaled, letting the valley winds curl around him like a protective cloak. He could feel something within the breeze, not a voice, but a presence, a guiding force that aligned with his heartbeat. Then, softly, he spoke. "I do not carry this message for myself. I carry it for the steppe, for the empire, for those who still live in truth. If you wish it, you will need to claim it with your own strength." The lead pursuer smiled coldly. "Then so be it," he signaled. The men advanced. Cthulhun surged forward with sudden power, propelled by wind that gathered beneath her hooves. Erdene leaned low, the edge of his cloak snapping behind him like the banner of an unseen army. The first pursuer lunged, sword flashing, but Erdene moved like flowing water. Their blades met for a single ringing heartbeat, metal on metal, a spark against the valley's silence. Erdene twisted his wrist, redirecting the strike with fluid grace. His sword glided along the enemy's blade and struck the man's guard with controlled force, knocking him backward without drawing blood. The second attacker came from the right, swift and precise. Cthulhun pivoted sharply, giving Erdene the perfect angle. He disarmed the man with 3 movements, clean, practiced, almost gentle. The enemy's sword clattered onto the mossy earth. The wind swirled harder now, lifting dust in glowing arcs. It moved with Erdene, around him, behind him, as though the valley itself fought at his side. The third man hesitated. He watched the way Erdine moved, not with brutality, but with mastery, not with rage, but with clarity. "You," he whispered, lowering his stance. "You are the unbeaten swordsman of the Courier's road." Erdine did not confirm it. He did not deny it. The third attacker charged. Their clash was faster, sharper, a dance of steel through spiraling gusts. Each strike echoed against the cliffs like distant thunder. Erdine's movements remained calm, controlled, the embodiment of balance. He stepped aside, redirected, neutralized. His blade kissed the enemy's wrist, light as a whisper, and the man's weapon fell. For a moment only the wind moved. The three men stood defeated, not killed, but disarmed, humbled, and breathless beneath the weight of a truth they had not expected. Erdine's voice came soft, carried by the valley wind. "Go home. This message is not for you." The lead pursuer stared at him, chest rising and falling. Finally he nodded once, a gesture of weary respect. The men retreated slowly, disappearing into the shadows near the cliffs. As they left, the valley wind softened, as if satisfied. Cthulhun relaxed, lowering her head. Erdine sheathed his sword with a quiet click that echoed like the closing of a chapter. But even in this moment of calm, he felt it. The message still pulsed with danger. The journey was not yet done. And far beyond the cliffs, the Empire waited. The valley settled into a deep and reverent quiet as the defeated riders disappeared into the shadows. Overhead, the storm finally began to drift eastward, its distant rumbling softening until it became nothing more than a tremor along the horizon. The clouds parted gradually, revealing a pale sliver of moon rising above the cliffs, a curved blade of silver suspended in the sky. Moonlight spilled into the valley of gathering winds, washing the grass in a ghostly white shimmer. The stone pillars glowed faintly, their ancient carvings catching the light like memories etched into bone. For the first time since he had taken the crimson-sealed message, Erdine felt the night open before him, not as a threat, but as a guide. Cthulhun shifted beneath him, steady and calm after the storm of danger. She nudged his leg once, as if asking whether the journey now continued. Erdine took a deep breath and lifted his gaze to the moonlit sky. The air carried the clear scent of wet earth, fresh moss, and distant pine, a cleansing after the chaos of the chase. The valley winds circled him gently, brushing against his face like a familiar hand. "You have done well," he whispered to Cthulhun, running a hand along her neck. The mare flicked her ears back in acknowledgment. There was no time to rest, though the valley offered peace. Karakorum lay many leagues ahead, its roads winding through forests, rivers, and plains. And somewhere in the imperial city, a leader awaited the message pressed against Erdine's chest. Whatever lay within the wax-bound scroll was urgent enough to drive men into ambush, into storms, into sacred lands. Erdine turned his gaze toward the narrow exit at the valley's far end, a tunnel of stone where the grass seemed to bend in a guiding arc. The wind brushed against his cheek again, urging him forward. The winds had shown him their favor. The valley had tested him. The steppe had judged him worthy. He guided Cthulhun toward the exit. As they ascended the winding path, moonlight followed them like a companion. The gullies opened onto a wide stretch of steppe that glimmered under the night sky, each blade of grass swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that matched the cadence of Cthulhun's steps. Crickets began their faint song. Distant wolves howled at the moon, and the entire world felt as though it were settling into a lullaby. Erdine pressed forward, his silhouette framed by the shimmering horizon. He carried the scroll close to his heart, feeling the weight of its message and the trust placed in him by the Empire. He carried the memory of the valley's wisdom, the calm steadiness of the steppe, and the strength of the mare beneath him. The road to Karakorum stretched long and pale, illuminated by the moon's soft glow. But Erdine was no longer a man fleeing pursuit. He was a courier on a mission, a warrior of the silent wind, a rider of the endless steppe. And the Empire, sleeping beneath its star-filled sky, waited for the truth he bore. Kutulun quickened her pace, the rhythm of her gallop blending with the night's whispering breeze. Together they moved like a single shadow across the living tapestry of the steppe. Ahead, the moonlit road unfurled like a silver ribbon guiding them home. Their journey was far from over, but tonight it was peaceful, and the wind carried them onward. Thank you for listening to this soothing journey across the vast Mongolian steppe. As the night winds settle and the moon hangs quietly above the horizon, I hope Erdine's courage and calm have brought you a sense of rest, peace, and quiet strength. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a gentle comment, perhaps telling me where in the world you are listening from tonight. Your support helps more dreamers find their way to these soft nighttime tales. Now, rest well. Let the winds guide your dreams, and may sleep find you as gently as moonlight on the endless steppe.